Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I want to share something a little different, something that's been on my mind for a while now. I spent 30 years of my life waiting for my brother to apologize, and he never did. My name is Joseph Brennan. I'm 80 years old, and I finally understand that I wasted 3 decades of my life holding on to anger over something that was never going to be resolved the way I wanted it to be. My brother's name was Michael. He was 2 years older than me, and when we were young, we were inseparable. We grew up in Boston in the 1950s, 2 Irish Catholic boys in a working-class neighborhood where everyone knew everyone and family was everything. We shared a bedroom, played stickball in the street together, got into trouble together. He was my best friend, the person who knew me better than anyone else in the world. Our father died when I was 23, and Michael was 25. Heart attack, sudden and devastating. He was only 52. Dad had worked construction his whole life, hard physical labor that eventually caught up with him. When he died, he left behind our mother, Michael and me, our younger sister Mary, and a small house that was paid off, but not much else. Dad also left behind a little bit of money, about $15,000 in savings, and a life insurance policy worth another $10,000. It wasn't a fortune, but for a working-class family in 1968, it was significant. It was enough to make a real difference in someone's life. And that's where everything between Michael and me fell apart. Our mother was still relatively young, only 50, but she'd never worked outside the home, and she had no real job skills. Mary was still in high school. I was working as an apprentice electrician, making barely enough to support myself. Michael was the only one of us who was established. He had a good job at an insurance company, a wife, a baby on the way. He was doing well. Before Dad died, he and Michael had been talking about going into business together. Dad had always dreamed of starting his own small construction company instead of working for other people. And Michael had been planning to help him with the business side of things, the books and the contracts, and the things Dad didn't understand. They'd talked about it for years, this dream of being their own bosses, building something together. After the funeral, after all the relatives went home, and it was just our immediate family sitting around the kitchen table, Michael brought up those conversations with Dad. He said that Dad would have wanted him to use the life insurance money to start the construction business they talked about. He said it would be a way of honoring Dad's memory, of making his dream come true, even though he wasn't here to see it. I remember the way my mother looked at him when he said that. She was exhausted from grief, from holding herself together through the wake and the funeral, from trying to figure out how she was going to survive without her husband. And her oldest son was sitting there telling her that the life insurance money, the only financial security she had left, should go to him to start a business. I spoke up. I said that wasn't right, that Mom needed that money, that it was supposed to be for her to live on. Michael got defensive. He said Dad would have wanted this, that it was about legacy, about building something that would support all of us eventually. I said that was speculation, that we couldn't know what Dad would have wanted, and that what mattered now was taking care of Mom. We argued for over an hour. Mary sat there crying, Mom sat there silent, and Michael and I went back and forth about money and duty, and what Dad would have wanted, and what was fair. Finally, Michael said he'd been talking to a lawyer, that as the eldest son, he believed he had a claim to Dad's estate, that maybe this shouldn't just be Mom's decision. That's when I understood. He wasn't just suggesting an idea. He was planning to fight for this money. He was prepared to take legal action against our own mother if he didn't get what he wanted. I couldn't believe it. This was my brother, the person I'd shared a room with for 18 years, and he was willing to hurt our grieving mother to pursue a business idea. I told him he was being selfish. He told me I didn't understand, that I was too young and too broke to see the bigger picture. We both said things we shouldn't have said. The conversation ended with Michael storming out, and that was the last real conversation we had for 30 years. What happened next was complicated and painful. Michael did talk to a lawyer, and there was some legal wrangling about Dad's estate. It never went to court because Mom couldn't handle the stress and the expense, so she agreed to give Michael $5,000 from the insurance money to make it go away. She gave it to him not because she thought he was right, but because she couldn't bear the idea of her sons being in a legal fight over their father's death. I was furious. I felt like Michael had bullied our mother into giving him money she needed. I felt like he'd betrayed all of us, that he'd put his own ambitions above his family when we needed to stick together most. And I expected, truly expected, that once he calmed down and thought about what he'd done, he would apologize. He would realize he'd been wrong, that grief had made him act selfishly, and he would come back and make it right. But he didn't. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and no apology came. Michael started his construction business with that $5,000 plus money he borrowed. He hired some guys, got some jobs, and started building the company Dad had dreamed about. And he acted like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just extracted money from his widowed mother through the threat of legal action. I refused to have anything to do with him. When he called, I wouldn't take his calls. When he showed up at family gatherings, I left early or didn't come at all. My mother begged me to let it go, to reconcile with my brother, but I couldn't. I was waiting for an apology. I was waiting for him to admit what he'd done was wrong. And until that happened, I wasn't going to forgive him. Years passed. I got married, had children. Michael's business grew, and he became quite successful, which only made me angrier. He was profiting from money he'd taken from our mother, building his life on what I saw as a betrayal. He tried to reach out a few times over the years, especially at holidays or family events, but he never apologized. He'd act friendly, try to make conversation, but he never acknowledged what had happened or said he was sorry. I held on to my anger like it was something precious. I told the story of what Michael had done to anyone who would listen. I made sure my kids knew why they didn't see their uncle very much. I justified my grudge by pointing to the fact that he'd never apologized, that he'd never admitted he was wrong. I told myself I was standing on principle, that some things couldn't be forgiven without an apology. My mother died in 1995. She was 77. In her last few years, as her health declined, she kept telling me the same thing. She said life was too short to hold grudges, that Michael and I were wasting precious time, that she wanted her sons to reconcile before she died. I told her I would reconcile when Michael apologized. She died without seeing us make peace. At her funeral, Michael and I barely spoke. We were both in our 50s by then, middle-aged men who'd spent decades avoiding each other over something that happened when we were young. We stood on opposite sides of the church, sat in different pews, and maintained the cold distance we'd perfected over nearly 30 years. After Mom died, I thought maybe that would be the thing that finally made Michael apologize. Surely losing our mother, seeing how much she'd wanted us to reconcile, would make him reflect on what he'd done and reach out. But he didn't, and I continued to wait, continued to nurse my anger, continued to tell myself I was right and he was wrong, and that vindication would eventually come. Mary tried to mediate between us over the years. She'd tell me that Michael had his own version of events, that he genuinely believed he'd been honoring Dad's wishes, that maybe both of us had been too young and too grief-stricken to handle things well, but I didn't want to hear it. I wanted an apology. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted Michael to admit that what he'd done to our mother was wrong. Last year, I got a call from Michael's wife. Michael had had a stroke, a bad one. He was in the hospital, and it didn't look good. She said he'd been asking for me, that he wanted to see me. I hesitated. Even then, even facing the possibility that my brother might die, part of me was still waiting for the apology, still thinking that maybe this would finally be the moment when he said he was sorry. I went to the hospital. Michael was in bad shape, hooked up to machines, unable to speak clearly. I sat by his bed, and he looked at me with these desperate eyes, trying to communicate something. His wife said he'd been agitated, kept trying to say my name. I sat there holding his hand that belonged to a stranger who used to be my brother, and I waited for him to apologize. But he couldn't speak well enough to apologize. The stroke had affected his speech, and what came out were just fragments, half words, sounds that didn't form meaning. I sat there for an hour, watching him struggle, watching him try so hard to tell me something, and then I left. I told his wife to call me if there was any change. Michael died 2 days later. He was 72 years old. I never got the apology I'd been waiting for. And as I stood at his funeral, my second brother's funeral, looking at his casket and thinking about the 30 years we'd lost, I finally understood something that should have been obvious all along. The apology was never going to come. Not because Michael was too proud or too stubborn, though maybe he was those things, but because from his perspective, he probably didn't think he owed me an apology. He genuinely believed he was doing the right thing, honoring our father's wishes, building something that would ultimately benefit the whole family. He'd seen the situation completely differently than I did, and in his mind, he'd done nothing wrong. And even if he had eventually come to see it my way, even if he had realized that taking that money had been wrong, 30 years had passed. Apologizing after 30 years of silence would have meant admitting he'd let our entire relationship die over something he could have fixed at any point. It would have meant acknowledging that his pride or his stubbornness or his perspective had cost us 3 decades of brotherhood. That might have been harder to admit than the original act itself. But here's what I finally understood standing at his funeral. Whether or not Michael should have apologized, whether or not he was wrong and I was right, I had wasted 30 years of my life waiting for something that was never going to happen. I had let my anger about one incident when I was 23 years old define the rest of my relationship with my brother. I had chosen to be right over being connected. I had chosen my grudge over my family. I thought about all the things we'd missed. We missed watching each other's children grow up. We missed holidays and birthdays and ordinary Sunday dinners. We missed being there for each other during hard times, during divorces and job losses and health scares. We missed the chance to be old men together, to sit around and tell stories about our childhood, to be the last 2 people alive who remembered our parents the way they really were. And for what? For an apology that never came? For the satisfaction of being proven right? For the principle of the thing? What did I gain from 30 years of anger? Nothing. Nothing except the knowledge that I was stubborn, that I could hold a grudge, that I could maintain my righteousness even at the cost of my own happiness and my family's peace. My mother had begged me to let it go. My sister had pleaded with me to reconcile. My own wife had told me I was being foolish, that life was too short for this kind of estrangement. And I'd ignored all of them because I was waiting for an apology. I was waiting for Michael to admit I was right. And in waiting for that, I missed the chance to have a relationship with my brother for the last half of my life. I'm 80 years old now. Michael has been dead for almost a year. And I can't stop thinking about all the time we wasted. I can't stop thinking about how different things could have been if I just let it go. If I'd reached out, if I decided that having a relationship with my brother mattered more than being proven right. Was Michael wrong to push our mother for that money right after Dad died? Probably yes. Was it selfish? Maybe. But was it worth 30 years of estrangement? No, absolutely not. Nothing is worth that. No grievance is important enough to justify losing 3 decades with someone you love. I've been going through old photographs lately, pictures from when Michael and I were young. There's one of us at maybe 7 and 9 years old, arms around each other, both grinning at the camera. We look so happy, so close, so completely unaware that one day we'd spend 30 years barely speaking to each other. And I think about that version of us, those boys who loved each other. and I wonder what they would think of what we became. If you're waiting for an apology from someone, if you're holding on to anger over something that happened years ago, if you're maintaining a grudge because you're waiting for the other person to admit they were wrong, please listen to me. The apology might never come. And even if you're right, even if you're completely justified in your anger, you will lose something far more valuable than your pride if you let that grudge define your relationships. I was right about what Michael did. I probably was. But being right didn't give me anything except loneliness and regret. Being right didn't make my life better. Being right didn't help me, or my family, or anyone. All it did was rob me of my brother for 30 years. You can't get time back. That's the hardest truth I've learned. I can't go back and make different choices. I can't call Michael and apologize for my stubbornness. I can't sit down with him over coffee and talk about our lives. I can't be the brother I should have been. He's gone, and all I have left is the knowledge that I wasted 3 decades waiting for something that was never going to happen. Don't make my mistake. Don't let pride or anger or the need to be right cost you relationships that matter. Life is shorter than you think. People die. Chances disappear. And one day you'll be standing at a funeral, looking at someone you loved who became a stranger because neither of you could let go, and you'll realize that no apology in the world would be worth what you've lost. I wasted 30 years waiting for an apology that never came, and now I'd give anything to have my brother back, apology or not. But I can't, and neither can you once the person you're waiting for is gone. Let it go. Reach out. Forgive. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve to have a life that isn't defined by anger and waiting. You deserve to have the relationships that matter to you. You deserve to not spend the last years of your life drowning in regret over time you can never get back. I learned this lesson too late. Please don't let it be too late for you.